The last real Mercedes, the legend of the W123. There is an old joke in the automotive world. If a nuclear apocalypse happens tomorrow, only two things will survive: cockroaches and the Mercedes-Benz W123. And in all likelihood, that Mercedes will still start on the first turn of the key and drive off into the sunset. Today, we are transporting you back to 1979, the era of disco, oil crises, and the Cold War. But in Stuttgart, inside the walls of the Mercedes-Benz factory, time seemed to stand still. They weren't chasing trends. They were building a monument to engineering madness, over-engineering, and a level of quality that seems like science fiction today. This is the story of a car that nearly bankrupted German mechanics simply because it refused to break down. A car that had everyone from Arabian sheiks to Berlin taxi drivers waiting in line for years. This is the story of the Mercedes-Benz W123. The machine designed with a single purpose: to outlive its owner. Buckle up. We are going back in time to understand why the W123 is called the last real Mercedes. Chapter 1. Born in Crisis. To understand the greatness of the 123, you have to understand the world it was born into. The mid-70s were a nightmare for car manufacturers. The 1973 oil crisis hit everyone hard. Fuel prices quadrupled. People no longer wanted massive gas-guzzling cruisers. They wanted efficiency. At the same time, the U.S. was introducing draconian safety regulations. The engineers at Mercedes faced an impossible task: replace the incredibly successful Stroke 8, the W114, W115. The new car had to be safer, more comfortable, and more economical, yet remain 100% Mercedes. Development began back in 1968. The project was coded W123. The philosophy behind it was radically different from what we see today. In those years, Mercedes-Benz was a dictatorship of engineers, not marketers. First, the constructors built the best car in the world, and only then did the accountants figure out how much it should cost. The design was overseen by the legendary Bruno Sacco and Friedrich Geiger. They created a masterpiece of conservatism. Look at it. In 1979, it didn't look futuristic. It looked monumental. Take the headlights, for instance. Notice the hierarchy? The lower-tier models had round reflectors under a single glass pane, looking like eyes. But the top-tier 280 and 280E models featured rectangular block headlights. It was a subtle status symbol on the Autobahn. If you saw rectangular lights in your rear-view mirror, you knew a powerful inline-six was approaching, and you moved over. But the beauty was just the tip of the iceberg. The real magic was hidden inside. Chapter 2. The Rolling Fortress. 1979. Airbags weren't yet standard, and many people still considered seatbelts an annoying suggestion. But the W123 was designed by safety paranoids. The chassis was based on the concepts of Bella Baregni, the genius of passive safety. A rigid passenger cell to protect the occupants, surrounded by specifically designed crumple zones front and rear. The W123 introduced a new collapsible steering column. In a frontal impact, instead of being pushed into the cabin and impaling the driver, it would telescope and collapse. The fuel tank was moved out of the danger zone in the rear overhang and placed vertically above the rear axle, behind the rear seat. This solution saved thousands of lives in rear-end collisions, even if it did eat up some trunk space. By 1979, on this very model, Mercedes began mass implementing ABS, the anti-lock braking system. Back then, this was magic, space-age technology. And here is an interesting detail: the door handles. Have you ever noticed how stiff and solid they feel? That is intentional. In an accident, if the car rolls over, the doors must not open by themselves. But at the same time, rescue workers need to be able to pull them open with leverage, even if the body is twisted. The hinges of a W123 are strong enough to support the weight of the car itself. Chapter 3. The Diesel Cult and Mr. Reliability. But let's be honest, we don't love the W123 for its crumple zones. We love it for engines that seem to be carved from granite and cast iron. By 1979, the engine lineup was broad, but the real glory came from the diesels. Specifically, the legendary OM616s in the 240D and the 5-cylinder OM617 in the 300D. Let's be direct. They were slow. Painfully slow. The 0 to 60 time for the 240 diesel was around 22 seconds. Overtaking on the highway required planning, a written application, and a blessing from the Pope. But these engines possessed a different quality. Immortality. A cast iron block, a timing chain, and a mechanical injection pump from Bosch. There was simply nothing to break. Oil, fuel, and occasionally some water. That is all it needed. The sound of that diesel idling is the sound of reliability, a characteristic clatter recognized by taxi drivers all over the world. Speaking of taxi drivers, they are the ones who made the W123 a legend. In Germany, ivory-colored W123 taxis became a national symbol. There is a true story about a Greek taxi driver named Gregorios Sachanidis. In 1981, he bought a used 1976 240D. He drove it as a taxi in Thessaloniki until 2004. Do you know the mileage when he finally donated the car to the Mercedes-Benz Museum? 4.6 million kilometers. That is 2.8 million miles. Yes, he swapped engines, but the car itself, the chassis, the transmission, survived a distance equal to flying to the moon and back 6 times. For this feat, the factory gave him a brand new C-Class. Honestly, a bad trade. The old 123 would likely outlive the new C-Class anyway. In 1979, the W123 was so popular that waiting lists stretched up to 3 years. Imagine walking into a dealership with a suitcase full of cash, only to be told, "Come back in 1982. This created a unique market phenomenon. 1-year-old used W123s were selling for more than the list price of a new one. People paid a 5,000 mark premium just to have the car right now. It was an unprecedented moment in automotive history. Chapter 4. The Analog Paradise. Interior. Let's step inside our 1979 Mercedes. The first thing you hear is the door. A deep, heavy, bank vault thud. Modern sound engineers spend millions trying to replicate this sound, but on the W123, it was real, a result of thick steel and high-quality rubber seals. Inside, there are no touchscreens, no ambient lighting. This is the kingdom of analog mechanics. A massive, thin-rim steering wheel, a dashboard with large, clear numbers, and the famous materials. If you have velour, it doesn't wear out for decades. If you have leather, it's tough, but eternal. But most common was MB-Tex, a vinyl material that could survive a nuclear winter. MB-Tex seats look brand new even after 40 years and 500,000 miles. Their only downside? In the summer heat, your back would stick to them, as air conditioning in 1979 was a very expensive luxury. Everything here runs on vacuum. The central locking operates silently and smoothly because it is pneumatic, not electric. When you turn the key in the door, you don't hear a click. You hear the car take a soft breath. Even the headlight adjustment was vacuum operated. If the system lost pressure, the doors wouldn't lock, and sometimes the engine wouldn't stop when you removed the key. Yes, To kill a diesel W123, you have to cut the fuel supply, and vacuum did that too. On the road, the 1979 W123 is a ship. The suspension swallows potholes as if they don't exist. The car leans in corners like a yacht in a storm, yet it holds the road with phenomenal confidence. German test drivers called the steering feel Mausetaut, dead mouse. It meant the steering didn't twitch. At high speeds, it tracked like a train. Chapter 5. The Wagon, the Coupe, and the Limo. It was with the W123 generation that Mercedes decided to start a revolution. By 1979, the T model was a massive hit. It was the first factory-built station wagon in the brand's history. Before this, wagons were made only by aftermarket coach builders because Mercedes felt the body style was too utilitarian for a luxury brand. But the demand was undeniable. The W123 estate proved you could haul lumber, dogs, and groceries while remaining an aristocrat. The rear suspension featured a hydro-pneumatic self-leveling system, keeping the car perfectly flat regardless of the load. Then there was the magnificent coupe, the C123. A shorter wheelbase and no B-pillar. When you rolled down all the windows, you got a sleek, pillarless hardtop silhouette. It was the choice of egoists and aesthetes, and, of course, the limousines. The Lang versions with 3 rows of seats. These transported diplomats, met delegations at airports, and carried wedding parties across the globe. Chapter 6. End of an Era and Legacy. Production of the W123 ended in late 1985. In total, nearly 2.7 million units were built. It was a colossal success. It was replaced by the W124. The new car was faster, more aerodynamic, and more modern. But the fan base reacted coldly. Taxi drivers in Stuttgart even staged a strike, protesting against the plastic and unreliable new model, though the W124 eventually became a legend in its own right. But the W123 remains in history as the definitive old-school Mercedes, a car created by engineers without budget cuts. Today, in 2025, the W123 is experiencing a renaissance. Clean examples are fetching serious money. Hipsters in Los Angeles, collectors in Tokyo, and restorers in Europe are hunting for survivors from 1979. Why? Because we miss it. We miss things that were built to last forever. We are tired of disposable gadgets and cars designed to fail the day the warranty expires. The W123 is a mechanical Swiss watch in a world of smart bracelets. It is heavy, it requires attention, and it cannot connect to the internet. But it gives you a feeling of invincibility that modern cars have lost. Epilogue. If you ever see a Mercedes W123 on the street, don't just walk by. Stop. Listen to the clatter of its diesel. Look at the chrome on its bumpers. You are not looking at an old car. You are looking at the last samurai of the automotive world, history cast in steel. A story about how humans once tried to create perfection, and perhaps they actually succeeded.